When we are not taught, as you said, we are not taught about Christ per se, as in someone in Christ. We are
Right.
taught about Christ, but we're not taught about in Christ. And it's a two different mindset. It's two different life. And so when you're taught about Christ, then the moving away from Christ becomes easy. I know about him. You know what I mean? Yeah,
Sure.
I can go party and do whatever my stuff is. I know about it. But when he brings us back, as we are going to go into much later on, when he brings us back in Christ, that's a different mindset. It's a different stuff that motivates us, that causes us to choose a different path than what we did back then.
Oh,
Because as I
huge.
said, we were taught about him. But when you get to know in him and living in him, much different type of relationship. That's where the good stuff is. You got there, man. You started experimenting, as they say. Every one of us do it, and we're doing partying, getting into whatever you have to get into and stuff like that. But I know that seed is still sitting there, and I know
Oh,
about
yeah.
God, and I know what He's about. So when you are doing the partying, because I was there, I was doing the partying, and yet he was tapping that thing once in a while, going, "Hey, buddy, talk to me about that, David," because, like I said, we know about him, and as we are partying and doing our thing, He's trying to awake us to bring us in Him. How did you manage all of that? You got to go now and create a new persona in a way because you came from a small school. You got to get into the big world. You have some foundations there, your brother, your best friend, stuff like that. Just a couple of little anchors, but you still have to create this new entire individual outside of that to manage with all these big city folks. How was David doing, man? How was he managing all of that?
I had 2 gifts in my life that were somewhat the anchors that kind of kept me grounded. The one was when I was probably 5 or 6, I had just this download, and it was basically Jesus saying, "A woman is gonna connect you back to God."
Yeah.
And, like, when you're a kid, that sounds great. You can watch Disney movies and you're like, "Oh, it's that kind of love, like Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, that's the kind of love that's out there. That's so cool." And that was arguably the primary navigation point of my life was there's a woman out there. And so I started writing poetry to girls when I was 9 or 10. By the time I got to high school, you realize that is not cool at all, and that's not what girls are looking for, and that's what I started to abandon as I got to college, but I still had this belief that, like, okay, there's a woman, and now there's, 16,000 women on campus or whatever the
Yeah.
number was. It's gotta be one of these, like, this is so cool that I get to find this person, and that was almost sort of this comical metaphorical, let me place this glass slipper on someone's foot to see if it fits, just this again, lots of feet, quite
Yeah.
frankly. The other piece was the virtue of growing up in the military was we spent 3 years in Japan when I was starting in 5th grade, and being exposed to Eastern culture at such a young age had a huge impression on me because, in the West, there isn't a real sense of the internal sense of self.